let's shift the focus a little bit to the implementation part of the technology, specifically the challenge of selecting the right use cases. We see that 40% of organizations today are deploying multiple GenAI models, but they are struggling with numerous challenges, predominantly the ROI challenge, not to mention the governance complexities that we have covered earlier, and factors like the data quality issues, integration hurdles, and many such challenges. So enterprises seem to lack the clarity they need in defining the right use cases. Anand, what is the best approach for organizations to identify high-value business-driven use cases? Should they focus on customer-facing applications or explore opportunities in operational efficiencies, employee productivity, or overall process optimization? What are your views on this, Anand?
Great question. And I hope by my answer, the audience doesn't think that I am already hallucinating. But for me, there is only one answer on this, Saloni. A business runs because of customers. And I believe businesses are more and more going towards becoming customer-centric, right? In fact, I would say the disruption that generative AI has brought in is all because of the fact that, as Tathagat rightly mentioned, it became a general purpose technology as opposed to a technology that only a handful was able to use, right? So it's already customer focused. So for me, any use case that is customer focused is a high value use case. Now, there might be several customer use cases that an organization want to do, right? But many a times what organizations also think is they want to differentiate themselves from some other enterprise, and as a result, they want to come out with the most unique use case that can wow their customers, right? While that's a good place to be, I personally believe that identifying the low-hanging fruits, making it very, very clear that it is very quickly implemented with a very fast GTM, making the customers really see the benefit. That, in my mind, is the best use case. For example, we've been talking about sentiment analysis for quite some time now, right? And in all the different applications that I have worked, projects that I have worked, and some of the different GenAI models that I have tested, sentiment analysis is a particular task that GenAI has almost mastered. I would say there is a little bit of hallucination, but it's a use case that GenAI has almost mastered. Ideally, almost all business should now be adopting generative AI for extracting sentiments about their customers. How many of them are actually doing it? One of the reasons why I found that businesses are not doing it is because they feel sentiment analysis is now like, a very generic use case. It may not add value. But in my humble opinion, I think that's a good start for any company to really start getting into using generative AI, understanding the customer potential. It has a direct impact to know what their customer feels, being curious about the customers, understanding the customer pulse. So these kind of low-hanging fruit use cases have to be very quickly identified and implemented. While I would like organizations to follow a balanced approach of taking some use cases on customer focus and on operational efficiency, I believe having a bias towards customer-focused, low-hanging fruit use cases can be really, really advantageous for an organization, because organizations can very quickly implement these use cases and then be able to generate customer interest, be able to make their customers sticky, number one. So what about the operational excellence side of the story, right? And this is a space where I believe the operational excellence side of use cases need to be driving the customer experience side of the use cases, right? It should not be like two different parallel streams. A good example could be going back to the sentiment analysis use case that I was talking about. If an organization is really interested in implementing sentiment analysis and understanding sentiments, what could be an operational excellence that efficiency that an organization can bring in? Being able to strengthen their pipelines of extracting customer input and feedback data, either through IVR or through Twitter or through their review feedback system, being able to create the right infrastructure to slice and dice the data, segment the customers through their feedback, All of this warrants a certain amount of operational efficiency, and an organization should not hesitate to invest in them, right? And by being able to create low-hanging use cases, very quickly implementable use cases from a customer standpoint of view, an organization can also improve their overall operational efficiency, right? So those are two important aspects that I feel will take an organization in terms of identifying high-value use cases. Last but not the least, I want to bring in is, why not actually take your end users and customers to co-create or validate your solutions ahead of the curve, right? In the banking realm, when I used to work, and even today, there is always a concept called as friends and family customers. Every time banks want to start and implement some large initiatives, they go to their most loyal customers. They do a survey. They tell them, "Hey, are you interested in these kind of products, these kind of services?" Because they know that these kind of customers would always give them the good feedback or the right feedback, so that the banks can take the next step, right? Similarly, with generative AI as well, enterprises should actually work hand in hand with their end customers or end users of their generative AI applications, bring them into their circle, and make them part of the overall success of the organization by implementing these use cases, right? So that is the second aspect in terms of the high value use cases that I would be thinking of when it comes to implementing generative AI solutions.
Thank you, Anand, for sharing your thoughts. Tathagat, if you could share some insights around that, please.
Yeah, I think Anand brought some very important point, and I absolutely agree with the first point he made, which is like, what customer pain point are we solving? But let me take a step back, because I came up with a very interesting perspective from my research, which in my research I call it as the purpose pressure orientation, and that came out as a very interesting sort of a construct. What tends to happen is there is a lot of outside pressure, because there is a lot of media hype. If you are any non-trivial firm, your board is putting pressure on you and saying, "Hey, your competitors are getting onto generative AI. Why are you not getting there?" And there is this whole kind of keeping up with the Joneses kind of a thing. On the other hand, a lot of firms may not be very clear about the purpose itself of why they are doing in the first place. So obviously, if you don't have pressure and you don't have any purpose, nothing will get started. If you only have pressure, that means you have a lot of outside pressure, but you don't have a purpose, you will end up with a very shallow implementation, because you're just like pleasing the masses, so to say. It's not going to really solve any problem, but you are just doing some kind of a thing. If you have internal purpose, but you have no pressure, the reality of the world today is that nothing will ever get done, because everyone has their own backlog for the next 2 years, and you know that you want to do it, but there's no pressure for you to do it in a sense of a time urgency. So the ideal quadrant where firms want to really play is really having the right purpose, and then the pressure acts as some kind of a creative tension between them. And I call it like a yin and yang sort of a thing there, because if you do not have the creative tension between the internal pressure and the external pressure, the things don't really happen. So, and if I have to kind of articulate them in how exactly does it manifest, I would put 3 points. Absolutely, what Anand said, the outside in perspective is absolutely important there. A lot of times, technologists have a tendency that just because I have a new technology, let me build something and then I go and find a customer for it. I call it a solution in search of a problem syndrome, and I think that's the worst killer I have seen with the startups. So inside out thinking is very dangerous in these things. I think we have to have an outside in thinking. Think of the problem, think of the pain point your customers have, and kind of solve it. So that's at a business level. But let me just take a step back. A lot of firms that are starting their journey today, they may not immediately have the confidence internally to say that we are going to build a generative AI based solution and we will go to the customer, because that's like a nirvana stage, right? You have not even done anything internally, and you're not just about like get up one day and say I'm going to deliver something to the customers. So here is what I've learned could be a good way for people to do it. Number one, look at anything that is creating problems for your people. If you are solving people's pain point, your own internal employees' pain point, you can never go wrong, right? So for example, I come from retail space, and in retail we say typically somebody in the store, an associate in the store, is typically walking throughout the day for something like 5 miles or 7 miles in a day. Now that's a lot of walking they are doing. Is there a way that you can reduce some of those trips so that they get 20% downtime, or they are able to reduce the amount of physical walking around they do or carrying the load, simply because you make them better accessible with the information that they need to do, so that they can make better data informed decisions around it, right? So I think, or for example, I was reading in one of the contexts in the healthcare that electronic health records have had a mixed kind of a report sheet. They were supposed to lighten the load of physicians and healthcare workers, and yet what happened was that a lot of well qualified physicians and nurses and healthcare staff was actually spending close to half the time in basically updating the healthcare records, whereas the whole premise was the technology will free up from the administrative work and allow them to spend quality time in the patient care. So clearly, the goals of digital transformation were not aligned to what the aspirations were. So the first thing I always tell is anything that helps people do their job better, alleviate their pain points, I think we should absolutely look at that. You can never go wrong with that. The second thing, and Anand spoke about that as well, was the whole internal operating processes there. There are always, the whole idea of making processes more efficient is a timeless thing. We have seen that from the lean production system from Toyota days, how exactly, and before that we saw with the whole Taylor's model that some of the problems were kind of containerized. So we said, hey, these are the patterns of production design, that there is a there is a manager, there is a worker, there is a process, and you are kind of not bringing any variance in that. But today processes are complex. There is always a there are always sources of inefficiencies in the process. There is always waste. It could be inventory, it could be rework, it could be scrap, it could be time wasted, it could be time that is wasted waiting for a decision to be made. So there are so many ways in which we have seen from the world of lean waste that it happens there. Look at the opportunities to remove that wastage. I think working on the people first will get you support of the people, because then you have more number of people who have seen the social proof that this technology can work and it can actually help people. There will be more number of people to raise their hand and who will say we want to be a part of it. By secondly working on the operating processes, you establish a lot of confidence inside your rank and file that, hey, this is something real. We are actually able to improve the bottom line by tightening our process. And if you think about it, for the last 70 years, the whole journey of lean and process excellence and Six Sigma and statistical process control and ISO, sorry, has been all about reducing the waste in the production, for example. And then when you have enough understanding and you have tightened your backyard, because now you are on top of your game, you have understood your processes, by that time, if you are able to bring that expertise and that capability of the organization to solve the customer problems, I think that would be the perfect way in which you are able to really do that without getting a lot of resistance or without having a lot of that solution in search of a problem kind of a situation there. So I think I would say the first principle to me is to find the right connection between process and pressure, the pressure and the purpose kind of a thing. And then really identify a journey. My recommended plan would be to really go from a people to the internal process and solve the customer pain points. But obviously, every organization may be on a different path in their journey already, and they might want to choose the one that works for them.
Thank you, Tathagat. Those were some great insights. So if we now look at the governance side of things a little bit, I came across an article recently which said that 50% of organizations lack a governance plan when they are implementing their GenAI projects. And that is astonishing, because we know that a structured approach is absolutely essential for GenAI success. Tathagat, if you could just tell us, with more than half of organizations lacking a governance strategy, how big of a risk is this? Can you throw some light on the key governance pillars organizations must establish from day one of their GenAI implementation journey to mitigate any risks that come along the way?
No, absolutely. I think it's clearly fast emerging that First of all, like I talked about earlier, generative AI to me is not a vertical technology, it's a horizontal technology, which means that unless we really have a common, and it is not something that's going to have us, like, for example, you might say that in my value chain, I have my customer support is broken. So I'm just going to fix the customer support. It's not going to make your product sell better simply because your customer support is better. What if your pricing is broken? What if your legal compliance is or your distribution channels are not really the right ones? So I think having a unified view of your value chain is the first important thing the moment you talk about at a business level, which also brings the perspective that how do you really kind of ring fence the whole generative AI efforts to make sure that it is aligning with your with the mission of your company, for example. How do you make sure that it is aligning to your legal policies? There are issues about reputation management. For example, how do you really make sure that your efforts are aligned and orchestrated, that you don't get broken experiences? So when you go and talk to your sales team, you get one experience. When you go and talk to your customer support, they say, hey, this is not what we are aware of. So I think it's important to understand that we are seamlessly stitching that. Now, one is obviously having the right kind of a policy around that and making sure that, hey, this is how we are going to adopt this technology. But just saying that in a piece of paper is not going to change the behavior of people. It's not going to make the compliance and the governance part of it much better. So I think what is needed in my view is, one is obviously having a well-crafted policy around what are we going to use it for, what kind of human safeguards are we going to have, what kind of what are the clear guardrails around it, like what are the absolute do's and absolute don'ts around it. Because it's a technology, it doesn't mean that we should apply it indiscriminately, and every business will find there are areas where they just are not sure about it at this point in time, so they are going to say we are not going to do that. So I think every non-trivial firm should have an ability to say what are we going to use it for. For example, today it might be too risky to say that we are going to use it for something that jeopardizes potentially the public health and safety. I think nobody will want to do that kind of a thing, right? Or anything that aggravates the human condition is something that you don't want to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to make the workforce educated around the tools, the technology, and the ethical aspects of it. I think that's the second biggest thing. A lot of times we think that AI and modern technologies, you have 5 or 10 people, you have very smart PhDs in data science or computer science sitting in a corner, and they are going to build the platforms, and that's enough. Like I talked about it, the whole nature of general purpose technology means that everybody in the organization is going to use it. And it's not enough for us to just have a very smart group of people sitting in a corner and doing it. What is important is every single person in the firm must understand the implications of that. Now, they may not be technical experts in that, but they should be able to, like I call it as the 5-minute embarrassment test. Everybody should be at every level should be able to speak up for 5 minutes without embarrassing themselves. That at least should be the level of proficiency they should have, or knowledge about the tools and technology and what is happening. They should not just get so like awed by the whole technology and say, hey, there's a god in the machine kind of a thing, right? I mean, so we have to bring it down to the realistic levels. And make sure that people have a healthy relationship with the technology. Because the coming paradigm, and this is also one of the things I talk about in the research, I call it as cognitive collaboration. This is the first time in 200 years of history, our modern industrial history, that we will see human beings working with non-human decision makers. We have never seen that thing. In fact, the whole organization behavior theory in HR is built around the common denominator that whether you are a manager, whether you are a subordinate, it is the human beings that work with other human beings. But for the first time, we are going to see that human beings may report to a non-human being agentic AI, for example. Like, in fact, you can argue that somebody who's driving for Uber is probably already doing it because the algorithm is really their manager, right? Or somebody may be managing the AI agents. I think I read this statement. It probably came from one of the CEOs. I think was it Mark Benioff who said that we are likely to see a 1 billion Salesforce agents in the coming years. And I think somebody else was, I don't remember the source of it, but somebody else was saying that we have to start reimagining the employees of tomorrow as the managers of agents. So we are already beginning to reimagine the human workers. Now, nobody has been trained on those things. We don't even know the first principles. They are evolving as we speak. So to me, governance is not just about policy making and saying that, hey, this is how we expect the citizens of this digital republic to behave, but we don't know how they will do it. Leave them figure out on their own. So educate them in the right way, help them understand what does it really mean, give them the right training, right understanding of that. The third thing I would say is having the right kind of a, because it's a technology driven initiative, a platform approach is extremely important to make sure that you can control the kind of things that you're doing. So, for example, you want to have some controls around data sharing, or you want to have some controls around user access, or you want to have some controls around what kind of information that's being passed out of it. If you have a platform, you will have an ability to control it centrally. So any policy deployment, any policy orchestrations can be done more seamlessly. And especially as we go into the era of multi-agent, where the agentic orchestration is going to become a looming nightmare in my view. It's a very, very emerging subject at this point in time. You might have 30 agents from 10 vendors in your firm, and you have no ability to kind of see, because they all may be built differently, they all may be architectured differently. How are you going to make sure that they are all orchestrated around your company policies and so on? And the last thing I would say is the whole idea of intake process. A lot of times people don't always think about it in that way, but how do you make sure that there is a right kind of a governance even at the, because it's very difficult once the genie is out of the bottle. It's a public embarrassment if you have to pull your product off the shelf, or if you have to roll back your systems. So how do you control that at the upstream input part of it, and say what kind of projects are we going to do that? What kind of areas are we going to start with, and how do we kind of do that? It may not be clear on day one what will be the guidelines around it, but they will evolve there. But having the mechanism will make sure that you are set up for it. So I would put these 4 or 5 points as the important issues in my view that will help build a more transparent environment, more accountable, at least more auditable environment around the governance. And like I said, it's not going to be a done deal on day one, but it will evolve over a period of time as a firm really undertakes the journey.
Thank you, Tathagat. Anand, would you like to add something to Tathagat's points, particularly around how organizations can operationalize governance and integrate it across different business functions and to basically scale GenAI?
In my humble opinion, governance is not a destination, it's a journey, right? And all the points that Tathagat really alluded to are going to be prevalent, and they have to be iterated n number of times before an organization continues to call itself as a completely well-governed organization, right? And in spite of that, there are going to be issues, there are going to be challenges, right? Particularly in the generative AI world, Tathagat was alluding to in one of his prior points, that how do we manage hallucinations when it comes to generative AI's responses? As the industry started taking steps to prevent hallucinations through right prompting, there is the other side of the world where they are also taking steps to hack these prompts, right? So it is like what I call as a Red Queen effect, where you'll have to constantly keep running to beat the market, and the same holds good for the governance aspect as well, right? So I don't particularly believe that an organization would have achieved its greatest and the what you call utopic environment of absolute governance when it comes to AI or generative AI. It is a journey. The moment an organization misses that view, that's probably their first downfall, right? So it's a very risky space to be in, and it has to be very, very rigorously monitored. So coming back to the point about operationalizing governance, right? So this is not something very new to generative AI, but what I also see is organizations trying to apply what worked well for them to govern data, and then to govern AI, and then to govern processes, assuming that will also work well for them to govern generative AI, right? That I believe could be a pitfall that organizations have to overcome, right? Why? Because whatever applies to data when it comes to data sharing, when it comes to data provisioning, data entitlements, security around data, all of them are important governance policies that have to be applied very well to ring fence your data. Now, when it came to AI, it was very quickly understood that AI algorithms need a different form of governance in addition to what data governance actually entailed, right? So governance, by the time people started putting governance policies around AI governance, a lot of issues happened, and that itself prevented AI applications to see the light of the day, right? And I think the same is also happening when it comes to generative AI, because assuming that the same policies that would work for data and for AI would also work for generative AI is not something that will work here, right? So organizations have to start looking at a different perspective of how to manage generative AI. Best way to do that is by what Tathagat said. Think of generative AI as a tool that everyone will be using. At least in the data world and the AI world, there were a select set of people that were actually using. So ring fences were much more easier because it covered a certain population of people, and certain population of people never ventured into that space at all. But with generative AI being a general purpose technology, almost anyone and everyone would be using it, which means more number of people would add to more number of problems, which also means more different varieties of governance would probably have to be brought in place. So first and foremost, what I believe organizations should do in terms of operationalizing it is clearly classify governance for data, governance for AI, and governance for generative AI, right? Like I think that that should be a mindset that needs to be in the DNA of an organization, number one. Number two is because it's a general purpose technology, I think the aspect that Tathagat mentioned, that everyone should be able to understand governance around generative AI is critical. So what that means is organizations have to be ready to break down these governance policies into small and easily understandable standard operating procedures so that even a leaf level member of an organization who is using a generative AI tool knows what to do. Simple example could be how many of the people that use ChatGPT within an organization's realm of enterprise ChatGPT know that they cannot be asking ChatGPT, giving PII information in the prompts, right? How many of them do that? Right? How many of them even know that? They might be thinking that generative AI would probably filter out PII automatically, and that is not the job of generative AI unless and otherwise the prompt is very clearly mentioning that, right? So these kind of policies need to be broken down at various different levels so that everyone in the organization becomes cognizant that they are prone to making these issues or creating these issues either through violations of governance policies without their knowledge, or through other applications that are probably pushing them to do so, right? So that governance policies needs to be broken down to small and clearly understandable standard operating procedures at all levels in the organization, specifically around generative AI, should be the first step. Next is in terms of automated monitoring tools. This is going to be very difficult, particularly around generative AI. See, you can monitor how an AI is creating or making predictions and outputs once the AI is in production. But how do you probably monitor an employee, chatting through a bot and making sure that the employee is not violating any governance law? So interestingly, the industry has started coming out with products where there are products that intervene between an employee writing a prompt and the prompt going into the generative AI. So there is this tool that comes and intervenes and then says, hey, your prompt has PII information, so I'm going to anonymize it and then push it into the generative AI, right? So there are such tools that are coming in play, allowing for monitoring of what is being prompted and what kind of responses the AI is also giving over a period of time. So it kind of helps in hallucination management. But the most difficult part when it comes to monitoring is how do you control the AI from getting biased, right? So for you to know that the AI is getting biased, you need to monitor what the AI is doing. So traditional monitoring mechanisms of model ops or ML ops, while they may apply, they have to be tweaked differently for handling LLM operations. So that is going to be a critical factor in fact, in terms of operationalizing these governance rules, right? There are tangible ones, there are intangible ones here that I'm talking about. And more importantly, the cross-functional training that Tathagat was alluding to, people who use generative AI, they need to be knowing certain bare minimum aspects of governance so that they are clearly responsible for what they are putting into the AI and what they are getting out of, right? That's going to be extremely important. Finally, any AI governance policy would probably have an escalation protocol. But in the case of generative AI, the escalation protocols have to be managed differently so that the audience or the stakeholders for going through this protocol are slightly different. So when it comes to generative AI, the business team, the technology team, the compliance and info security team, the IT team, all have to go in hand to be able to identify anomalies, identify breaches, monitor them, and stay ahead and stay out of them, right? That is going to be the key when it comes to operationalizing any of these governance policies as well.
And can I add a couple of points?
Sure.
I mean, I like the point, Anand, you said. It was spot on that governance is not a finish line. It's a continuous journey. And I think I was tempted to take an example which is recently came there, and obviously I won't name the firm, but it seems like one bank transferred $81 trillion to somebody last year before they realized the mistake. So if you think about it, banking technology has been around for like 50, 70 years, and it probably is one of the most mature technologies because we are playing with money. If we still have issues around checks and balances and lack of suitable controls, that a reputed bank is able to wire somebody $81 trillion, an astronomically impossible figure, and bypasses all the controls. And this is in a finite state machine, a deterministic software realm. Now you try to see what is the scope of the universe of errors that can go wrong in the context of generative AI. I think that it's a mind-boggling amount of things. And I was recently seeing in the last 1 week or 2 weeks, I've started seeing that there has been this whole wine glass challenge, and maybe you've also seen that. I've never seen that in the last 3 years, but suddenly it came up. So it shows a new kind of a failure mode has come there. You take any of the generative AI which creates the image and say generate an image of a wine glass full to the brim. You give that many words in the prompt, every single time it generates the image of a wine glass which is half full, but in the text it will say it is full. So we have been talking about the whole physics informed neural networks. We have been talking about how exactly it is constructing. We are talking about reasoning chain of thoughts kind of a model and so on. But the point of governance is important to keep into consideration that the technology is continuously, we are discovering new failure modes, as simple as that. There's no way we can make a piece of paper, laminate it, and keep it on the shelf and say, this is our governance policy. You will find new failure modes. You will find new kind of challenges and bottlenecks and edge cases day by day. So I think the whole idea of educating people cannot be overstated. It is something that has to be part of a firm. And it is like saying everybody is going to be a generative AI company or go out of business, as simple as that. And if you want to stay in the business, you will have to make sure that you are operating in a fundamentally different manner than what has been before. The whole execution mindset has to go away, and the whole idea of learning as a mindset has to come in. And only then you can kind of build the right kind of a governance around it. So just wanted to add some thoughts on that.
Great inputs. Thank you so much.
Great Thanks. Thoughts, Anand and Tathagat. Definitely, GenAI is governance of GenAI is a continuous process, and it should start at grassroots.